And we are live. Hey guys, it's Ruben from Dubb's podcast Connection Loop. Today I have Tony Blauer on with me. And one of the things that strikes me about Tony is that it seems like you've been in the same gig and you've done the same purpose since the 80s. So you're one of those guys that's really unique in that you knew your purpose early on in your life and you've been pursuing that ever since. And I think that what you're doing is fantastic. I'd love to learn more. What is your origin story?
You know, it's funny you bring this up because I was writing an article a couple of weeks ago online, and I always talked about my origin story was as a self-defense instructor. You know, one of my students lost a fight in 1980, and while he was describing what had happened in this violent encounter, it was like the god of self-defense hit me with this lightning bolt and said, "Oh my God, we're teaching self-defense wrong." And I was thinking that as the origin story, and I've always told it that way for decades. And I was sharing a story online about getting attacked when I was 12, leaving a baseball game. And these two kids, maybe 15 years old from the local high school, jumped me, beat me up. I went home, told my dad, it was 1972, hey man, I just got jumped. And I was fine. I didn't get really hurt. It was like emotionally, traumatic. And he said, well, you got to learn how to defend yourself. And the kids.
So did he have any training, or had he
No,
done ever martial arts?
no, he told me, great question. He told me no. He says we gotta get you some martial art training. And it was just around like within a few months later, Bruce Lee passed away, and then martial arts exploded in that era, and that was ignition for me. Like seeing him and reading his story, me getting jumped, and it was somebody online said, "I'm so glad those two guys jumped you because look what you're doing now." Like, had that not happened, I grew up in Canada. I live in Southern California now, but I grew up in Canada. And when you grow up in Canada, Ruben, you're either a skier or a skater. You're either playing hockey or you're skiing. Well, I grew up on skis. I was one of the top skiers in Canada. I was competing. There was whispers of me, maybe if I continued on this trajectory, I would represent Canada, maybe in the Olympics if I kept, so had I not been attacked, maybe I'd be selling skis somewhere, and ski wet. So my new origin story is this idea, like, wow, like that was crazy serendipity or synchronicity that I got attacked, and something hit me, and I realized. So I grew up in the '60s watching the original Bruce Lee on the Green Hornet, and Batman, and the old original Wild Wild West, and I share all this stuff because, in the 60s, you're glued to your black and white TV, colors just coming in. And it was all these stylized fighting. And every time there was fighting in a TV episode, whether it was like the goofiest, like most unrealistic fighting, because they didn't really understand choreography back then, I was transfixed. I was always just totally engaged. And when I was 15, to jump ahead a number of years after I started doing martial arts in 1972, and then Bruce Lee passed away and the whole ignition thing, I'm sitting on the floor of my home and I'm like reading Bruce Lee magazines, trying to achieve the splits.
And because he was insanely flexible.
Yeah, man, but he was anybody who got into him. I mean, he's one of the most famous icons in the world. But, everyone thought they were Bruce Lee's biggest fan, but I was, so that was crazy that they all thought they were. But seriously, I'm on the ground trying to do the splits, and my mom walks by, and you got to remember, it's 1975. And she looks at me and she says, "Hey, dear, you're 15. Have you thought about what you're going to do when you graduate school? Are you going to go into the family business?" My father ran an import-export business that was passed on to him from his dad. And my mom says, "Are you going to go into the family business, or are you going to be a lawyer or a doctor?" Because those are the three choices you had in the 70s, right? Lawyer, doctor, or family business. And I looked up at her, Ruben, looked back down at Bruce Lee, and I said, "Mom, school is not going to be a big thing for me. It's not going to play a big factor." And she's like, "Oh, really?" She goes, I go, "Yeah. I'm going to be a famous martial artist like Bruce Lee. I'm going to develop my own self-defense system." I literally said that, and I knew it like it was just matter of fact. And I always knew that. And here I am. I make this joke, I'm 59 years old now. I've been doing this for 43 years. Haven't changed my mission, haven't changed the vision. And still every day, yesterday I woke up around 5:30 and I had this idea for like a new iteration of an important program we do called Be Your Own Bodyguard, and just got up and started writing. So you're like decades later, still trying to improve, the metaphoric software.
Amazing, man. I mean, to hear about the fact that you got jumped, it's a form of bullying. Someone messed with you, and you had that response, you had that reaction at that point that you said, I never want to let this happen to me again.
Right.
And I want to learn from this. And it's because of that adversity that you went through that you found your purpose. And I always find it intriguing that when people don't realize that it's the struggle that we go through and it's the adversity and the challenges, the trials and tribulations, the crap that we go through in our lives, early on, later on, doesn't matter, that actually forms who we are and what our purpose is. The two most important days of our lives, many say, are the day that we're born and the day that we find our purpose, why we're born, you know? And I think that you found that early on. Now, a lot of people don't have that. I'll call it a luxury, even though it didn't seem like a luxury at the time. But I applaud you. And you did mention that you have accomplished exactly what you set out to do when you were 15 years old, because as I understand it, your own defense model, is it called Spear? I want to
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah. I dig that. And I love that twist or reframe on the two most important days in your life, because old school is the day you're born and the day you die and what you do
Yeah.
in between. And, metaphorically the same thing, but it's, finding that purpose. It's tricky for some because not a lot of people get that. And you could see that. And that's one of the big things that I do now is, we've got two parts of the company. One is the kind of like the survival side of the spectrum, and this is like, what do we do during a violent encounter? And my clients are mostly, professional law enforcement, military, emergency services, and we've got a division for the general public. But the other side of my company, the flip side of this axis, is the thrive side. So we've got survive and we've got thrive. And the thrive is more, so we've got personal defense on the left and personal development on the right. What I discovered along the way, and you talk about insane serendipity, is I discovered through studying violence that the way to make things happen is to change our relationship with fear.
Mm.
And when we change our relationship with fear, we change our lives. And I could say, oh, Ruben, I'm going to teach you, how to do this gun disarm. I'm going to teach you how to do this palm strike. I'm going to teach you how to kick somebody in the nuts. I'm going to and you're practicing the movements like everyone does. But then when the event happens, we freeze, we hesitate,
Mm-hmm.
we have self-doubt. And you can see that in the boardroom, and you can see that in the boxing ring. You can see, it all over the place. So one of the things that I discovered was, it's not a recipe, but it's a way to review, to relook at fear. The compound value of this was that in teaching people, so what I did is when I had that moment of adversity and I got jumped, my dad said, hey, you got to learn how to defend yourself. You're going to high school, da 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 da. And I do the training, and I was in several altercations growing up, and I always remember how horrible I felt, the adrenaline dump, the butterflies in my stomach, the sweaty palms. And I was like, what is that? No matter how good I got physically, there was something missing psychologically. And so, if you think, pain is the mother of invention, I started to study psychology and mindset and developed a whole different way to look at fear. Instead of going with the conventional fight or flight, which is, everyone talks about that. I said, well, that's all intuitive and instinctive. What I need to do is understand the coach in my mind, the guy in the back of my head saying, you're going to get your ass kicked here. You're
Yeah.
going to lose. Now,
Yeah.
I want to circle back to your question about Spear, and then drive this back to, many of your listeners might not care about self-defense, although I think that every person, male, female, should understand. Not like I teach people how to fight, I teach them how to not fight. I'm more about situational awareness. I'm more about de-escalation and understanding how to avoid a confrontation. But in recognizing that fear played, in my opinion, the most important attribute to successfully doing anything, I started to study that and developed a whole component of that. In that process, I developed what we now call SPEAR, which is an acronym for spontaneous protection, enabling accelerator response. So I was trying to create these drills that inspired so much fear in the practitioner.
With Dubb, you can easily send your business videos from Gmail, LinkedIn, CRMs, and so many more places, but you don't have to take my word for it.
Absolutely perfect.
Screen records, landing pages that can really help businesses to grow.